This is a fish. It's the great white shark, and it's the most terrifying fish that's ever existed on this earth. Oh, that's not true at all. In fact, if you rewind the clock and go back in time, long before the dinosaurs ever existed, the ocean was ruled by a fish way stronger than a great white. A fish that no longer exists today. But if it did, we'd all be cooked. This is, or was, the Dunkleosteus. And despite having a clunky dunky name, they were deadly. Incredibly deadly. But this animal wasn't just scary because, oh, giant fish from a million years ago. Its body was not normal. Now, whenever people start talking about prehistoric sea monsters, the conversation almost always immediately goes to one specific animal, the megalodon.
And yes, obviously the megalodon was huge.
It was a 50-foot shark that ate whales. But biologically speaking, the megalodon isn't actually that unique. If you want to know what a megalodon looked like, you just take a modern great white shark and you scale it up. That's basically it. It followed almost the exact same rules of anatomy that modern sharks use today. It just happened to be, well, big. But Dunkleosteus lived during a time called the Devonian period. This was around 360 million years ago. For context, this is hundreds of millions of years before the very first dinosaur ever took a step on land. During the Devonian period, life was entirely concentrated in the oceans, and because evolution was still in its early stages of figuring out how complex animals should even work, the creatures swimming around looked completely alien. You had giant sea scorpions. You had bizarre, shelled squid-like things. So when evolution decided to create an apex predator for this specific environment, it built something from the ground up. An animal designed specifically to completely destroy the bizarre anatomy of everything else around it. But to understand exactly why this fish was so lethal, we first have to look at the massive problem that every single animal in the Devonian Ocean was desperately trying to solve. The Devonian Ocean was genuinely violent. Everything was trying to eat everything else, and predators were rapidly developing jaws that could easily crush the bodies of normal fish. So, if you were a fish living in this era, you had a very serious problem. How do you survive in an ocean where everything has the jaw strength to instantly crush you? Well, the evolutionary solution that most animals went with was actually pretty straightforward. You just become impossible to crush. This led to an entire class of animals called placoderms. Instead of having normal scales, they looked like, well, this. Their bodies were covered in thick, interlocking plates of solid bone. They basically wore their skeletons on the outside of their bodies, which honestly sounds incredibly uncomfortable. And Dunkleosteus was the absolute undisputed king of the placoderms. The entire front half of this animal, its head, its face, its chest, and its gills were completely encased in a massive, solid bone helmet. This armor was up to 2 inches thick in some places. For a fish, that's an absurd amount of defense. It meant that virtually nothing in the ocean could even scratch it. If another predator tried to bite a Dunkleosteus, they'd just be slamming their teeth into a solid wall of bone, and their teeth would just shatter.
This thing was swimming around inside a rock.
But having a head made entirely of solid bone creates a problem for something that's supposed to be an apex predator. If your entire face is made out of heavy, shifting plates of bone, you can't really have normal teeth. Normal teeth are rooted into a jawbone. But if your jawbone is an armored plate, normal teeth would just snap off the second you try to bite down on something hard. And remember, in the Devonian Ocean, everything you're trying to eat is also covered in thick bone armor. So how do you bite through solid bone if you literally can't have teeth? Well, Dunkleosteus solved this problem in a pretty disturbing way. The actual jawbones themselves just extended out of its mouth and formed into massive, solid bone blades. It essentially had 2 giant cleavers permanently attached to its face. But the truly terrifying part about these bone blades is how they actually functioned when the animal moved its mouth. Whenever Dunkleosteus opened and closed its jaw, these top and bottom bone blades would slide perfectly past each other. The friction of the bones rubbing together literally ground down the edges of the bone. This means that every single time the fish took a bite, it was actively sharpening its own mouth. It had a built-in self-sharpening mechanism. The more it ate and the more it bit down on things, the sharper those bone blades become. It never had to worry about losing a tooth or having a dull bite, because the simple act of opening its mouth maintained its weapons perfectly. But even with a self-sharpening face cleaver, the fish still had to physically catch its prey first. And this is still kind of an issue. If you're a fish and the entire front half of your body is covered in 2-inch thick plates of solid bone, you're incredibly heavy. And in the water, being heavy means you're slow. This is a huge problem. You can have the deadliest mouth in the entire world, but it's completely useless if you physically cannot swim fast enough to actually catch anything. So how does a slow, incredibly heavy fish actually manage to hunt smaller, faster fish? It just forces them to come to it. The skull of a Dunkleosteus had a specific set of joints that let it throw its mouth open in a fraction of a second. When you open your mouth that fast underwater, it creates a massive void, and physics means water has to rush in to fill it. By snapping its jaw open, the Dunkleosteus created a localized underwater vacuum. Any fish that was swimming anywhere near the front of this monster would be instantly sucked backwards, directly into the open mouth. The prey didn't even have to make a mistake. They could be swimming away at full speed, and the sheer force of the water displacement would just drag them backward into the bone blades. You don't even get the dignity of losing a chase. You're just suddenly in a mouth. It completely bypassed the issue of being too slow to chase things by just turning its mouth into a suction-feeding trap. When we talk about animals with strong bite forces, we usually bring up things like crocodiles or great white sharks. But the bite force of a Dunkleosteus was on a completely different level. Researchers have calculated that at the very back of its jaw, this fish could bite down with a force of over 1,000 pounds. But the truly devastating part was at the very front of the mouth, right at the tip of those sharpened bone fangs. Because those fangs came to a point that looked like, well, this. All of that pressure was concentrated into one microscopic point. Think about it like this. If someone pushes on your arm with a flat hand using 10 pounds of force, it doesn't really hurt. But if they take a sewing needle and push it into your arm with that exact same 10 pounds of force, it's going straight through your skin. Please don't actually try that. By concentrating its bite force onto the sharpened tip of its bone blades, the Dunkleosteus was generating a localized pressure of up to 8,000 pounds per square inch. This is the bite force that rivals a T-Rex. And it needed this exact amount of force for one very specific reason. This bite was specifically engineered to shatter the armor of other placoderms. It was designed to cleanly slice through solid bone. But I know what you're thinking. Placoderms aren't really ruling the seas anymore. Would this even be practical today? Let's say we somehow managed to clone a fully grown Dunkleosteus and we dropped it into the modern ocean. And to study it, a team of researchers gets inside a standard steel shark cage and lowers themselves into the water. A great white shark can ram a shark cage, and it might bend the bars a little bit, but the shark is ultimately just going to hurt itself. Its teeth will break against the metal, and it will eventually just swim away. But if a Dunkleosteus swam up to that exact same cage and decided to take a bite, there is a very reasonable chance that you aren't making it out alive. If this fish decided to bite the door of a modern car, it would punch a clean hole straight through the metal exterior, through the internal framing, and out the other side. So yeah, your car insurance probably wouldn't cover a Devonian fish attack. There's basically no standard, commercially available structure that you could put in the water that this fish wouldn't be able to just bite its way through. And because it had the ability to bite through literally anything in its environment, it developed a very specific and very gross dietary habit. When you possess a mouth that can slice through solid bone, you don't really have to be picky about what you eat, because honestly, nothing can even fight back. So Dunkleosteus just ate everything. It ate ancient sharks, it ate armored fish, it ate giant arthropods. But frequently, the only thing in the area that was actually large enough to be worth the energy of hunting was another Dunkleosteus. These animals were highly cannibalistic. They'd constantly attack and eat smaller members of their own species. But this created a very annoying issue for the predator. Even with powerful stomach acid, you can't exactly digest solid bone. The meat and the organs digest just fine, but the heavy bone plates just sit in the stomach, taking up space and refusing to break down. So the Dunkleosteus had to regularly throw up. Paleontologists have actually found fossilized remains of Dunkleosteus vomit. These are called boluses, and when they break these puke fossils open, they find them completely packed with the half-digested, crushed bone armor of Dunkleosteus. It literally ate so much of its own species' armor that it just walked around regurgitating massive balls of crushed bone. Nature is beautiful, isn't it? This paints a picture of an absolutely unstoppable, sick-minded monster fish. But recently, science actually had to rewrite this. For decades, if you opened a dinosaur book or watched a documentary, Dunkleosteus was always depicted as this massive, 30-foot-long sea serpent. It was drawn looking very similar to a great white shark, just with a bone helmet slapped onto its head. But there was a major flaw in how we came up with that 30-foot measurement. Because the back half of a Dunkleosteus was made of soft cartilage instead of bone, it almost never fossilized. For a very long time, the only fossils we ever found were the armored skulls. So, early scientists just looked at the massive size of the skull, compared it to the proportions of a modern shark, and guessed that the rest of the body must have stretched out to 30 feet. By analysing the very few complete fossils we do have, and comparing the distances between the head and the fin joints, researchers realised we had the proportions completely wrong. Dunkleosteus actually only averaged around 11 to 13 feet in length. When this news broke, a lot of people online were incredibly disappointed. They felt like the ultimate sea monster had just been severely downgraded. But if you actually look at the new proportions, it's arguably even scarier. It was insanely thick. It had the body shape of a massive tuna, but covered entirely in bone. Just a giant, chunky, heavily armoured block of muscle. I mean, just look at him. He is a beefy boy. And while 13 feet might sound small compared to 30 feet, you have to remember that this 13-foot animal was built entirely of solid bone and muscle. It was incredibly dense and incredibly heavy. So, how would this revised version actually hold up against a modern apex predator? Let's pit the Dunkleosteus against the ocean's current apex predator, a fully grown great white shark. If you look at the physical traits of these guys, the great white actually has a lot of advantage. It's faster, more agile, and way smarter. If this fight happens in the open ocean, the great white is going to be able to outmaneuver the Dunkleosteus with absolute ease. But the real issue happens when it actually tries to attack. If the great white lunges in and bites the front half of the Dunkleosteus, the fight is immediately over. The great white's teeth are designed to slice through soft blubber and flesh. If those teeth hit a 2-inch thick blade of solid bone, they're going to instantly shatter. The shark will completely ruin its own mouth, while the Dunkleosteus won't even have a scratch on its armor. And the moment the shark slows down from the impact, the Dunkleosteus only needs one single opportunity. It snaps its jaw open. The vacuum sucks the shark inward, which would only really work at a really short distance though because of how heavy the shark is. And Dunky bites down with 8,000 pounds of pressure. One bite and the great white is literally cut in half. And it's really hard to win a fight when you're in two pieces. The modern shark simply doesn't have the physical tools required to deal with heavy Devonian armor. But obviously, the Dunkleosteus wasn't completely invincible. If it was, it would still be swimming around today. In nature, extreme strengths always come with glaring vulnerabilities. You simply cannot have an overpowered weapon without sacrificing something else in return. And for Dunkleosteus, that sacrifice was a completely exposed blind spot. Remember how the thick bone armor only covered its head and chest? Well, that meant the entire back half of the fish, its tail, its fins, and its lower abdomen was completely soft and naked. If the entire fish was covered in bone, it would literally be too heavy to swim. It would just sink to the bottom of the ocean and starve. But this created a huge problem. If anything managed to get behind the Dunkleosteus, it was completely defenseless. A smaller, faster predator could easily swim up from behind, take a massive chunk out of its soft tail, and swim away before the heavy, chunky Dunkleosteus could even turn around to fight back. This is exactly why smaller, faster sharks from the Devonian era were able to survive alongside this monster. They just waited for it to be distracted and attacked its blind spot. And it's also why Dunkleosteus constantly had to watch its back against other Dunkleosteus. In a fight between two of these tanks, whoever managed to get behind the other one first automatically won. It was the world's most violent game of tag. But having a soft tail wasn't actually the biggest threat to this animal's survival. There was a much more severe consequence to being this big. This fish needed a ridiculous amount of food. Just existing burns a massive amount of calories. Swimming with that much heavy bone burns even more. This is the ultimate trap of being an apex predator. Your survival completely relies on having an endless buffet of food beneath you. You need the smaller fish to be thriving so that the medium fish can thrive so that you have something to eat. If anything happens to the bottom of the food chain, the animals at the very top are the ones who suffer the most. A small fish can survive on a few scraps of food for weeks. A giant fish will starve to death in a matter of days if it can't find a bigger meal. And around 358 million years ago, the Devonian period came to a brutal end. The Earth went through a prolonged extinction event. The exact causes are still debated, but it involved massive changes in the global climate, and more importantly, a severe drop in oxygen levels of the ocean. When oxygen levels drop, the first things to die are the plants and the plankton. When they die, the small fish die. And when the small fish die, the entire food chain completely collapses. The Dunkleosteus was simply too big to survive a famine. When the food vanished, the heavy bone armor and the self-sharpening blades suddenly just became useless dead weight. You can't eat armor. You can't eat your own bite force. Or really, anything that isn't actual food. The very traits that made the Dunkleosteus the most terrifying predator in the ocean are exactly what caused it to starve to death. It required too much energy in a world that suddenly had no energy left to give. So, when the dust settled from the extinction event, who was actually left standing? The survivors were the small, fast, highly adaptable sharks. They were the normal-looking fish that barely needed any food to survive, and could easily adapt to changing oxygen levels. Being able to completely dominate one specific environment is great, right up until that environment changes. And the Earth is always changing. So while the fish swimming in our oceans today might seem way less terrifying than an ancient tank with bone blades for teeth, you have to remember one thing. The Dunkleosteus is a fossil in a museum. But if you somehow manage to make a time machine, don't go challenging this fish. It's not going to end well. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this one. I have a few videos planned soon that people suggested in the comments, like about right whales, so please keep any suggestions coming. Also, if you guys haven't seen my second channel yet, Beyond the Green, make sure to check that out too. It's similar stuff, just outside the water.